The sommeliers, I think, are sort of searching for what's next. I don't feel that we have a handle on it yet, because a sommelier essentially is attached to a restaurant. I mean, that's the definition of the sommelier profession, is a wine expert who plies their trade on the restaurant floor. And the floor doesn't really exist at the moment. But yeah, there's a lot of people who I think are just taking stock at the moment. It's kind of, everyone's a bit punch drunk. No one kind of knows what the next step is, and everyone's sort of reeling from the multiple body blows that have taken place over the last few weeks.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. I'd make the world's worst waiter. As a restaurant reviewer, the only thing I'm not very good at biting is my own tongue. A great waiter has the ability to communicate the right message, deliver an understanding of wine, and manage the perceptions of everyone in the room. They are the sales and marketing arm of the whole dining experience. When we think of restaurants, often we think of the food and going back to eat the food, but it's often the service that will bring us back to a restaurant. With restaurants forced into closure or providing only takeaway, what has happened to the front of house? Chris Morrison is one of Australia's leading sommeliers. He's worked at Key for Guillaume Brahimi, and he's the author of a wonderful book called This Is Not a Wine Guide. Chris, how are you going, mate?
Pretty good today, mate. Thank you. Today is a good day.
Now, you more recently have been Group Wine Director of QT Hotels. What has been the immediate impact on you of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I guess it's kind of like the same for everyone, but just on a larger scale. As a group, and as a group with a national footprint and a huge casual labour workforce, we've had huge stand downs. We're completely running solely on just some accommodation level at the moment, because we do have some people occupying rooms for quarantine. But as an F&B department, thousands of people are now obviously without work and waiting on what the next steps are for the group in the future.
And what's happened with you? Have you been stood down as well?
I have, yeah. I was, along with the entire wine teams across all our hotels, was stood down at the same time as our front of house staff and our back of house staff. So I think for the wine guys in particular and girls, there's been a real recalibration of sort of our future in the profession, and I think that's hit us quite quickly. But in general, from a front of house standpoint, the entire workforce for QT Hotels is now just, again, waiting on what the next steps are from a government standpoint and what that means for us as a hotel group.
Restaurants have been forced to either close or provide takeaway, which is providing some employment for chefs. But obviously, dining is about the front of house and the service, and sommeliers like yourself. What is the impact on the front of house from your perspective?
Well, that's a good point, mate, because there's no, from a skill set standpoint, sommeliers in particular, like chefs, are specialists. But however, working in a category that's got, like food, has multiple categories. So fast food, home delivery, wine has on-premise, online, off-premise. The sommeliers, I think, are sort of searching for what's next. I don't feel that we have a handle on it yet, because a sommelier essentially is attached to a restaurant. I mean, that's the definition of the sommelier profession. Is a wine expert who plies their trade on the restaurant floor. And the floor doesn't really exist at the moment. So there's a lot of guys and girls out there who are, again, keeping themselves busy, drinking through their cellars, going online, discussing wine, trying to keep themselves connected, I think, most importantly, to the industry. But yeah, there's a lot of people who I think are just taking stock at the moment. It's kind of, everyone's a bit punch drunk. No one kind of knows what the next step is, and everyone's sort of reeling from the multiple body blows that have taken place over the last few weeks.
What do you think the long-term impact will be on that sort of on-premise wine industry?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question, I think, for us, because you and I have seen the growth in on-premise over the last 10 years. I mean, I remember when you mentioned Guillaume Brahimi, when he closed Benelong in 2013, which is only 7 years ago, the industry is almost unrecognisable to what it has become today. And I mean that largely, of course, in wine. I mean, wine has changed so rapidly over the last 5 years, with new categories, younger sommeliers coming through, more education like quartermaster sommeliers, WSET. There's more somms out there than ever before. Unfortunately, that also means there's more SOMs out there currently without roles and jobs. And when the industry moves forward into post-COVID, and we have to go through what will be pretty strongly controlled hygiene protocols, spacing legislation about how many people we can fit in our venues, there will be less roles. So I think there's a big conversation, probably the most important conversation I think this industry's ever had in Australia, is how we adapt and pivot the sommelier skill set and their importance to restaurants in a post-COVID hospitality industry.
This sommelier community, why is it so important to restaurants, and what does it deliver to the experience for the diner?
I guess more importantly now is diners in Australia in particular have become so aware of the importance of wine and beverages in the overall restaurant product offer. And restaurateurs have always understood the ability of wine and beverages to drive revenue and profit. So if you look at like one of our signature restaurants, the standard F&B, so food and beverage split for your average spend per head check is about 60%, 40%. So 60 food, 40 wine and beverage, which is pretty good. That's a very strong beverage program delivering some really good revenue. But what that means, I guess, moving forward for restaurants and sommeliers is the idea that 40% is how we still try and how we convince and communicate the importance of that as an overall part of a P&L, like the success of business post-COVID. And I talk about post-COVID because that's the most pressing one, I think. But longer term, I think it's how we still maintain the importance of sommeliers, what they deliver to the restaurant experience, and how they help businesses succeed. I think that's going to be the big conversation for us because we focus a lot on reviews online, we focus a lot on our expertise and wine knowledge, but we still don't focus enough on how much the sommelier skill set is business management, is marketing, is sales as well, of course, is training and development. Like all these things add I think, a huge weight to the overall restaurant experience. And I think that's what the sommeliers, I think, in general, will have to have a big chat about because that's what's going to be the thing that separates us out from the rest of the field in the future.
One of the things that I've always admired of you, and I've enjoyed your hospitality in many restaurants since I've known you, and is your ability to take intimidation out of that wine experience for guests. And I just wonder, why did you get into the game? And you clearly love it so much.
I was like, I think like a lot, like a lot of people, I was kind of forced into it. I was about 18, 19, and I was kind of lost. And I'm your classic hospitality, like personality profile. I was completely lost. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I sort of fell into restaurants because, and this is the thing, right? Like restaurants for me, it's not so much about what's on a plate and in a glass. What makes restaurants, the connective tissue in restaurants is the humanity in it, like the human experience. And I think for me, that's what attracted me to it. The fact that when I needed a home and I needed a family, a restaurant gave both those things to me. And I think that's why I love it so much is because for me, a restaurant's a home. It's not a building with a business hold, bricks and mortar. It's people and relationships. And I think that's what I got into it and what still keeps me into it. And I guess in regards to wine, that's what I wanted the restaurant wine experience to always be about, is not so much about the bottle backwards, so the bottle, and then you talk about vintage and variety and region and tasting notes and scores sometimes. What you want to do in the restaurant is take the bottle forward. You want to talk about the moment, the occasion, the food you're eating, where you are, why you're there. Like those things to me make wine an actual experience rather than just a drink. And I think that's also going to be more important in the future because that human connection, that humanity, which makes hospitality so unique, is I think now it's been taken from us. We realize how much we need it and how much we miss it.
There was a really good point that you put in there, and it's something that you covered extensively in your book, is the connection that wine has with food and with experiences. And do you want to just tell us a bit about how you see wine's role with food?
Yeah, I'm not classically trained, so I've done CMS. I did my WSET in 1999 when it was on stone tablets. So I haven't got like this kind of contemporary education that a lot of my colleagues have. But I guess what I learned early on was that very human experience we just talked about. If you make it about that, suddenly it becomes about the reasons why someone's in your restaurant. and largely there to eat. Wine sort of comes along for the ride. And I think the idea that trying to remove so much of the language and so much of the mysticism around wine that made people like, I can remember people's faces when I would walk towards them at a restaurant with a wine list in my hand, and the terror you could just read on their faces that I was going to stop, like a teacher with a detention slip walking through class. Like, you just think they're going to stop. He's going to talk to me. He's going to talk to me. I don't want to talk to him. Right? And I go, hi, how are you? Good to see you. Welcome. And you can see them start to relax a little bit. So for me, the kind of great thing about wine, it's kind of a conduit just for as a social ritual, is that wine should be about excitement, not nervousness and fear. And if you can get someone excited about wine, and that's the trick, right? Like, there's no book that teaches you that. It's experience on a restaurant floor, and it's a sense of humanity, and it's a sense of wanting to serve. And I think that's what makes great hospitality such a unique profession, is because not everyone has that. Not everyone wants to serve someone else just for the pure feeling of serving them makes that person feel better. And I think that's what I loved about applying that to wine, because that's when I have the best results. And I don't mean just in sales. I mean that person lights up, because the restaurant floor is still the best place in the world to sell wine, because the results are so immediate. And to your point, mate, as a sommelier, the only way you can alter a wine is with food. Like, that's the only way you can shift texture, flavor, even aroma, is with food. Like, all the work for sommeliers has already been done. We just got to pull a cork and pour it, not stuff it up. But if we get food in play, that's when you start to see that craft, that bit of magic that a som brings, that 1+1 = 3. And I think that's when people look at you as a sommelier and go like, I get it now. I get it. So I think that's what I love about not just working in the profession, but mentoring younger sommeliers and trying to get them on board with that same mindset.
You know, this pandemic and the impact that it's had on everyone in the industry, what it's done is it's I think it's people are starting to recognize the value of good food and the value of going to a restaurant because they're missing it. Do you think that as we return to restaurants, that could shed a new light on the value of service?
100%, mate. I think we're going to crave service again. I think we're going to crave. I really hope that when we come out the back end of this and we're talking at a table, like you and I are sitting closer than 1.45 meters and having a glass of wine again, and we're discussing what it's like, how great it is to be back in a restaurant. And suddenly, what's on a plate in a glass, it's not that it doesn't matter less. It's just I'm looking for someone to talk to more about it. I want to engage, because hospitality staff have, well, chefs have achieved so much celebrity, and rightly so, because of what they've meant to a food industry, producers, and overall our hospitality market. I think the front of house experience is something that still is waiting on its moment. I think, the sommeliers have become very popular as well, and influencers and gatekeepers of knowledge and in their own right. But I think the front of house experience still isn't given its platform properly. And I think, unfortunately, something so terrible as what we're going through at the moment, at the back end, may shine a light on it again. And I think, like, I'm old enough now, I've been in hospitality for 30 years, and then I'm old enough to remember really great frontmen in restaurants, great maitre d's, like great general managers who work the floor, and they were identities, and you look for them. Now you're sort of trying to peer into an open kitchen or through the kitchen door to catch a glimpse of the chef. But now I miss those days. I miss the days of walking to a restaurant, someone shakes my hands and knows me. And I think that's what could come back, is that sense that front of house is not just a profession, but it's integral to having a great night out in the restaurant.
You know, a bit earlier you mentioned about changes to restaurants that, and they're going to have to make in relation to social distancing and hygiene in this sort of post-COVID world, as you put it. What do you think are some of the solutions going forward with that?
That's the one that I think has got, that's the horizon at the moment. There's this absolutely, I don't think there's anyone starting to play with what it looks like. I think everyone's still in a holding pattern and this kind of one day at a time mentality, because most large groups like us are still working on how to implement job seeker. That's their biggest priority, start putting money in people's pockets, our staff, of course. How we look like post-COVID will be the next one. But then again, how does post-COVID affect our brands? And as you know, restaurants are brands, small, big, medium, doesn't matter. And then how do we become a leader in those, in the post-COVID hospitality industry? Like, I think we're going to obviously have the policing of our hygiene is going to be, I can't imagine how strict it's going to be, as with spacing. And essentially, look, restaurants that we have that are licensed for 120 people will suddenly become 40-person restaurants. and then we'll have to rework all our numbers around that. So big restaurants will shrink in size, big groups will shrink in size, and the overall on-premise market will shrink as well. But to combat things like, again, hygiene and spacing being for me the two big ones, is how do we then reset our restaurant models in the short term, I hope, to cope with just this general downturn in what we can expect in revenue. Because if there's less money coming in, there's less money to spend on a lot of things. A lot of those things that obviously been driving the industry over the last 10 years.
What's your last great wine and food memory, sort of pre-COVID?
Freak, so it's not chips and champagne. Um, I think, like for me, when I think of really good wine, I always think about like not so much tasting note or a score or how much I bought it for. I think about like where I was, what I was eating, as you said, and who I was with. And it's been a long time, and I think we've discussed it before. But being in San Sebastian with my wife when I proposed to her, like 7 years ago, I've had a lot of great food and wine experiences since then. But this is kind of that seminal one, right? This is the one that sort of stands out every time I think about it. And he was having anchovies and chicory, and it just flipped the lid on everything I thought about wine and food. And just to be in a place where they celebrated that so passionately for me was like just a life affirming moment that all the time, money, and work I'd spent on food and wine and studying it and working in the industry was actually well spent.
During this time, you've had the added pressure of sort of ongoing health condition. Can you tell us how you've been dealing with, obviously being stood down, um, the thoughts of what the future of your profession is, and also the personal challenges you've had?
Yeah, I mean, having like a health condition and a pre-existing one that puts me into what is obviously popularly called the at-risk category. Um, I kind of I've been there before. Like when I first started suffering from my health conditions, I needed to take a long look at the role of the sommelier. I had to reevaluate my place in an industry that was in a way killing me, and I had to sort of make a hard call on what I would need to do to change and adapt if I was to kind of stay working in something that I had started as a kind of, as I said, as an accident, but I'd grown to love like passionately. Um, but I didn't talk to anyone. I lied about my health and I hid it behind, she'll be right, mate, kind of approach. I didn't reach out to anyone. And then when I did, I was kind of forced to reach out because my health deteriorated so much that it was kind of obvious I was suffering. I was then given so much support and so much kindness and understanding that, yeah, it became, I kind of regretted not reaching out. And now, sort of in this kind of new world order where, again, I'm at risk. And again, I find myself asking kind of those terrifying questions that I guess a lot of people, not just the at risk category people, are about what do I do now? I find myself reaching out more, and I find that's giving me hope. So I think that kind of feeling of hope. Um, and I'm in part of an industry, and I'm in an industry that cares for its people and doesn't discard them. And I think my advice as someone who's known the price of not reaching out, I would say to anyone who's feeling like they can't, please reach out. There's help there for you.
Mate, what would you say to younger people as well that are sort of struggling at the moment, probably jumping into this career for the first, early years of their career? You've been around a bit longer like I have. What would you say to the young kids that are sort of maybe a bit disillusioned by what's going on?
I mean, like going back to just when we first started chatting, like I said, I didn't study, like I didn't use textbooks. I was extremely, extremely fortunate because I was mentored. I found people who were experienced hospitality workers back in the late 80s, early 90s when I started, and I was very fortunate to be taken under their wing. And, whilst they weren't, they weren't angels and they were definitely misbehaving, they were also giving me nuggets of advice, guidance, principles, values that I still refer to today. It was my most important education was to be mentored by someone because, believe me, don't getting your information from, social media online is going to mess with your head what you need, especially as a hospitality professional, especially as a young one, and I look at the younger people who've succeeded, it's not because they were trained well, it's because they were mentored. It's because they had someone to guide them. And I think that's kind of been lost in hospitality a bit. It doesn't get its a light shone on it, I guess, because everyone's very focused on, I can get through this. I'm kind of like, it's very tribal at the moment, as you probably know. Like, there's a lot of people who are identifying themselves by the last bottle of wine they drank or the last restaurant they ate at. But I think what will be needed in the future for the younger generation is to, again, like I just said, reach out to people who are experienced, look for guidance, because what you need is real world advice now. You don't need to be down, you don't need to be logging on and finding it through Instagram. What you need is people who've experienced downturns, who've gone through challenges, and who can help you and guide you. And going back, that's the thing that gives me so much hope about our industry, is just its humanity. Not so much about there's great cooks and great winemakers and a great sommelier serving you, pardon me. It's more about there's just so much humanity in our industry, so much like desire and passion to take care of each other. And I think right now that's what we need more than ever. So again, my advice to the younger generation is just turn off Instagram for the day and go speak to someone who you work with, who you respect. And I guarantee you feel a lot better at the end of the day for it.
There's been a common thread through a lot of the discussions I've had with people on this series, and it sort of revolves around the fact that there's lots of issues in the hospitality industry, and that this may actually be an opportunity to solve some of those and create a new dawn and a better hospitality industry. There's some things that you think you'd like to see gone and things that you'd like to see blossom.
I think by the nature of any period of uncertainty and turmoil, we will naturally revert back to things we know and trust more. Um, I would like us as an industry to go back to what the fundamentals of what makes our industry great in the first place, which is just that very simple idea of service. As you know, like, I'm really passionate about this. I think, if you look at a bill at the end of the night, there's nothing really there for service, right? You pay service on top in a tip. And a tip for me, like most people in the industry, was always, a bit of black cash. It was something we used to pay bills as part of, obviously, our lifestyle, but it was an important part of our income. But for a guest, we saw it as a benchmark of how much they measured their experience with us as a waiter or a sommelier. And I think that what I would like to see come back is that focus again on that service experience. So if I took wine as an example, I'd like to see us talk less about what a wine smells like and what a wine tastes like, as to what someone drank it with, who they were with when they drank it, and why they were in a restaurant. Like, that kind of the idea of, it's less about wine and it's more about the wine experience, of which wine is a small but really integral part. I think that's what I'd like to see us go back to. Um, I like us to see us educate customers on that. To be honest with you, we've been paying far too less in restaurants for a long time, and I'd like there to be a concerted effort to educate diners and drinkers that to enjoy the standard of food and of wine and of service we have in this country, we've been underpaying for decades, and we need to pay a little bit more to keep this industry alive. And I think that's going to be on us to educate people. And I think we have to take that on board as an industry, not just an individual chef or a writer and critic or a sommelier like me. It's like, it has to be a collective effort. I think industry bodies should be really on the front foot with that right now. But that shifting of value, like I think you mentioned value before, is crucial in keeping more businesses operating, because if prices have to go up, which they will if some restaurants to continue on the current model, then that value proposition needs to be really well articulated.
How do you see the next sort of 6 months playing out? And, you how do you see the new hospitality world? What sort of restaurants do you think will emerge?
Um, Look, I think the next 6 months are going to be obviously super crucial, because a lot of the government stimulus that's being put into our economy and our industry will start to grip. What this sets us up for, obviously, is hopefully a time where we can start to take stock of what's happened during COVID, and then start the conversation about what kind of industry do we want post COVID. Like, I don't feel we can wait for this to happen to us. We need to start talking about what we want. I mean, I would say in the last 20 years, there's been no industry that has exhibited more progression and more entrepreneurial spirit than hospitality. Probably outside of technology, hospitality is the most progressive industry. So much of the innovation that's taken place over the last 10, 15 years has been remarkable. And I think that's what we need to hold on to, is that entrepreneurial spirit, that sense of innovation, the way we can pivot and adapt, because we do that by our very nature, being an industry like hospitality, which by its nature is transient. So for what I see though out of this 6 months is from a wine standpoint and the kind of restaurants that probably wine programs will take part in, is the industry will be smaller. There may have to be smaller wine programs. There'll be a huge impact on the supply chain, and that's still to be felt. There's several shockwaves still to come. The current state of on-premise, the effect on the sommelier position. I mean, you're starting to see the language shift a bit now from that one day at a time mindset, now slowly giving way to like what's next. So I think we're starting to see people starting looking through COVID a little bit, and they're starting to take stock and then decide what the industry they want. But I think from a short-term standpoint, which the next 6 months is, I think a lot of people are just battening down hatches and trying to get through it. It's going to be painful, as we all know. So many of your mates, my mates, they're a combination of big group all the way down to sole traders, and everyone's lost their jobs. So what kind of industry is built up the back of this, I think, will be leaner. There's no doubt about it. It'll be more efficient. It'll have to work with less revenues, so I think the P&Ls and the business management will be better. Some restaurants that, with the greatest of respect, probably shouldn't have been open, were buoyed by a very buoyant market, will close, and that's not a bad thing in the short term because they do shift, I think, the dial around the value proposition in restaurants a bit. But I think out of the back end of this and the new hospitality industry that will emerge out of the back of it, I think will still be defined by what we talked about with its humanity, it's the restaurant experience built around those relationships between the guest and the hospitality professional in them. I think there's too much talent in our kitchens and on our restaurant floors for the industry to change its product offer, but we'll just have to adapt like we always have.
When you're back in a restaurant for the very first time having a meal, what wine are you going to drink?
Champagne and a really expensive bottle of it. It'd be something to celebrate.
Well, that sounds like I might have to join you.
I think you will, mate.
Listen, Chris, it's been great talking as always. Keep in touch and stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Huck. Appreciate it.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Stay safe, isolate and be well.